Look, it's a rare treat when you get to introduce one of your graphics heroes, which is why I'm so excited to introduce Morgan McGuire, Chief Scientist at Roblox. So many of us have learned from his books, his publications, his talks, his open source, his teaching. I mean, his Twitter alone, I feel like I would love to get a degree from Morgan McGuire just from what I've learned from his Twitter. He's made so many contributions to graphics and has helped people like myself get into the field. And at Roblox, he channels and accelerates innovation across the company to build a creative, safe, civil, and scalable metaverse. Today, Morgan is going to speak about scaling the Roblox real-time distributed system for global social 3D. Morgan?
Thank you, Patrick. That was very generous. So from the perspective of where my own career started, wow. I mean, SIGGRAPH 2022, the metaverse, like, welcome to the future. We are living in it. About 25 years ago, I was a dropout from MIT. I was working on my second startup. It was with Tim Berners-Lee, who's the creator of the World Wide Web. And we were building an interactive, 3D, hyperlinked metaverse, right? We were trying to create this parallel to the then static 2D web. I was really struggling to articulate the vision of what we were trying to build, both inside and outside the company, to venture capitalists, to the new team members. At the time, people saw the web as completely static, gray documents in Netscape Navigator. They were looking at it at 1024 by 768 on a cathode ray tube. Many of them were dialed in on a modem through AOL. And we're showing up and talking about VR goggles, and it's kind of hard to get people to understand what we wanted to build. And then one Sunday, I read Snow Crash, the novel by Neil Stephenson, who spoke at the beginning of our course today. And that was Sunday. Monday morning, this is pre-Amazon, I went out, I ran around to every bookstore in Cambridge, Mass. I bought every copy of Snow Crash. I handed them out to the graphics team, and I said, that's the spec. That's what we're trying to build. He's explained it. It's called the metaverse. So for me, that being able to be in the same course with Neil today and join all these great speakers and tell you about this, it really is, this is the future that I've been working towards my whole career, and we're now right at the cusp of building it. So our spec that we adopted from the metaverse, from Snow Crash, was, first of all, it has to be 3D and embodied. And that's so that you get intuitive physical navigation. So anybody can kind of understand that real-world physics roughly apply, how to move. You don't have to learn special key commands or programming language to be in the metaverse. That it should be simulated, deeply, deeply simulated, like Rev from NVIDIA said this morning. Ideally down to the level of atoms and quarks and photons, abstracted as we try to approach that. But that it should also be fantastical. So it shouldn't be the mundane physics, that you should be able to do superhero things or create anti-gravity and stuff, right? So when you cross boundaries into different privately created experiences, the rules of physics can maybe be bent a little within an overall simulation-based framework. You should be able to enter and participate from many different devices. And all the way down to old mobile phones. These are kind of different windows into a shared reality, that there isn't a consistent view of the metaverse, but that it's a platform, and you can kind of, like a science experiment, you could observe it in different ways. And that the ultimate manifestation of that for immersion should be a high-end VR headset. It should be VR, it should be body tracked, it should be haptics, but it could also be I'm sitting in the back of this talk on my phone participating. Critical, and this is going to be half the talk, is that everyone creates, that everyone can create their own avatar, their own clothing, their own whole experience. And then there's kind of a hierarchy you can walk up of I'm starting to add code and interaction, maybe I'm defining plugins, maybe I'm making my own authoring tools for the environment. And that, and this is the absolute most important part, that there is state that moves between experiences, that my persona, my currency, my inventory, things I pick up or buy or acquire in one place, I can bring those to others. So every video game today, every movie, every book, that's already its own content universe, right? So you play God of War or something and you're in that universe. It's a fully fleshed out thing. But then when you go to, a Star Wars game, it's a different universe and there's no bridge between them. And so that's what makes the metaverse, is that I can take things across experiences and I can start to kit bash and put together things that have never been intended to be put together before, as long as I pass, the permissions and flags of whatever the experience is so I don't break it. So that was our spec 25 years ago. That startup didn't succeed at scale. So we built some cool tech. It was MMX, software rendering stuff. And that's probably why you haven't heard of that startup. So that was my second one. My sixth metaverse startup was successful, though. So 16 years ago, Dave Baszucki and Eric Castle called me up, and they had this idea of social 3D virtual building environments. They were both from a CAD mechanical engineering background. And so I took, I still had that copy of Snow Crash, which is now autographed as of today. So I put it in the suitcase and I flew out to California and we started building this thing. And Dave and Eric wrote the physics simulator and the networking. I wrote the scene graph management and the renderer. We split a sandwich 3 ways because that was the entire company of Roblox at the time. And we put it online and shipped it after about 6 months. And the server was a single Windows box that was sitting in the closet for the the entire metaverse that we had built. I think we had watching the numbers go up. And we got up to 50 users, and we had a party because that was amazing, right? That people are actually using this stuff and they're building, and that's it. We've invented the metaverse. So I went off and became a professor for decades. And Dave and Eric did the hard work of recruiting the hundreds of brilliant people, many of whom are in that row today, right now, who built up the company to what it is today. And it's a big difference. So we started with our 50 users and the Windows machine in the closet that would kind of overheat. We now have over 250 million monthly active users on the platform, 50 million of them every day. There are millions and millions of experiences that they have created. So at Roblox, it's not a game. We don't make content. We make a platform, and all the awesome stuff that you see people using on Roblox, they've created themselves within the community. That community spans 180 countries right now. They communicate in over 45 officially supported languages on the platform, as well as chatting in ones that we don't even support yet. And our virtual economy is larger than that of many real-world countries. In fact, it's how many creators, and I'll introduce some of them throughout the talk, earn their living. And that can be bedroom coders and artists. In some cases, it's small app companies. So it's really created this small but self-sustaining community and is growing and is delivering a lot of sort of the first steps of that metaverse spec that I had from way back when. So the message I want you to take from that is that Roblox today is real. It exists. It's existed for 16 years. It's social 3D at scale. And for me, in terms of the flexibility of creation and accessibility to the broader community, it is the best and largest incarnation of what we're trying to build for the metaverse. I think we're all just getting started. So I don't want to say that we've succeeded, but we're having a lot of traction and a lot of success, and it's been out there for a long time. So that's delivering on the first part of that future that I was trying to build 25 years ago, which brought us to here today. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to share the lessons that I learned on our journey so far for others who are building platforms or who want to engage with these metaverse platforms, as well as kind of mixed in there a vision for where I think we go next and the problems that we're looking at, some of the solutions we're looking at. I'm a scientist, so this is all speculative. This is not definitely what engineering is doing. It's not our product plans. But I'm just kind of openly sharing everything that we're thinking about and talking about and seeing in the industry. And I invite you to collaborate with us. We have a tremendous number of both industry and academic collaborators with my research lab. So we're happy to collaborate with industry. And if you're a scientist or an engineer or in product, come help us build it too. We're growing in all areas of the company right now. So this is my original Snow Crash, and then for nostalgia, I went out and bought a second copy of Snow Crash yesterday, which is, if you wait 6 months, you can get the hardcover, but I wanted to have it here today. And I could have downloaded this instantly to my Kindle, right? So my e-paper reader that I carry thousands of books in my backpack on trips because we live in the future. But again, for nostalgia, I decided to walk down to Massey Books on East Georgia Street instead. And we really are in the future. I popped off the virtual reality headset that I was getting a show floor demo of. I walked past the 3D holographic displays, and I set out down Hastings Street. I had my bone conduction transducer headset on. I was getting my AI curated news feed straight from Google. And it's coming from my pocket computer, right? And it's telling me about, the robots on Mars, their latest update, telling me about the pandemics, the wars here on Earth. South of the border, here we are in Canada, there are medical protests raging, and a law to slow the boiling of the planet just narrowly passed by one vote. And cryptocurrency is crashing again. The lies in politics were something that I think even George Orwell would have been stunned by what was going around on social media. So I really felt like I was living in Snow Crash at that point. In fact, I adjusted my breathing mask right, as I threaded my way through the homeless camps on the sidewalk, and I had to be careful not to step on someone or step in something. And then this bright orange 700 horsepower hybrid electric supercar roars by me in the homeless encampment. A police cordon showed up yesterday and started closing in on the tents. And so I duck into the bookstore, right, and I electronically transfer funds from that pocket computer to get my book, and get it autographed by Neil this morning, and try to get out of the neighborhood before this sort of police thunderstorm breaks on us. So welcome to the future, folks. We have to be careful. And if we look at some of my favorite late 90s science fiction from the era where this dream kind of started of the metaverse, you have Snow Crash, Infinite Jest comes out a few years later, Existenz, The Matrix, Avalon. These are all within a few years of each other, and they're all kind of defining the metaverse. And there were two messages, and I think it's important to not lose either one. So don't lose the inspirational message. Those were the pieces of visionary fiction that showed me, that showed many of you, yes, that's the thing I'm trying to build. That's what my career has been leading up to. That's what I'm inspired by, this amazing virtual experience that can connect people around the world, across languages, across cultures, where I can have superpowers and be fantastical, where it doesn't matter if I'm in a wheelchair, it doesn't matter how I grew up, what my identity is, I can be who I want to be and interact. And that really is utopian, that's amazing, and that's what we want to build. And the other is warning us what'll happen if we don't get it right. So not just getting the tech right, but getting right how these systems roll out, how they're governed. So those authors, they knew what they were talking about. We've all seen, as the speaker said this morning, the open web really degenerated into clickbait and creepy tracking and paywalls and stuff. We've seen some giant tech platforms really go wrong with social media and hurt people despite brilliant technology underlying it, but without a vision of what it means to really be a global platform maybe. And you've seen unsuccessfully managed society and government and economics and their implications in the physical world. So we need to do this right. We need to build not just the metaverse, but we need to build an ethical, civil metaverse when it goes into the consumer space. And we need to do it from the ground up. That was the painful lesson from the web. You can't add some of these properties later. They need to be part of the protocols, part of the system. So we're inventing the future. We are the stewards of the future. And we have to embrace that responsibility when we design systems. So we need to think about what are the economics of the metaverse? What is the governance system of the metaverse? How do we protect rights? And how do we allow people to interact or prevent them from interacting in ways that we don't think are helpful? So we talk about digital twins. I don't want a digital twin of everything in the real world. There's some horrible stuff in the real world that we don't need to replicate that. And I think all of you, want to improve the real world through technology. And I deeply believe that one of the ways to do it is to create this better digital world and connect it to the real world and have that be sort of a seamless integration that can kind of lift things up by doing it right. So the challenge of creating social 3D systems, it's not about just animating vertices and shading materials and routing your RTC voice streams. That's important. That's stuff I work on every day. But we also need to listen to these visionary authors like Stevenson, but also more on the social side, like Le Guin, Gibson, Butler, Leckie, Okorafor. These are some of my favorite authors, and they're all telling us that the systems of the future can't be just neutral. We can't just allow human nature, allow the free market to dominate everything, that we have to somehow build in civility, ethics, safety, fairness, and privacy preservation from the ground up so that they can't be abused and exploited. And that's both at the technology level and at the policy level, because all of us, when we create platforms, you're implicitly defining policies, and hopefully you're thinking about them actively. So the challenges of these global platforms, they're really first about moderation, about governance, about economics, as well as GPU shaders and network stacks. And I'm pleased that Roblox's business model and technology were specifically designed to safeguard some of these desirable properties, like civility and also stability. And that's lesson number one from my journey to the metaverse, is that we have to start with the needs of the whole community, not what could we do with the tech, but what is the need we're filling with the tech, and then build a sustainable model where our goals as platform providers, the goals of the content creators, and the goals of the content consumers are all aligned. And then so that's a sustainable model. So don't just build a tech showcase or get greedy about monetization. And my team is very proud that many marginalized groups, as a result, have found safe spaces on Roblox to create. And I'll sort of introduce some creators, and you'll see how that manifests. It's important to us that you can define your virtual identity on your own terms, that you can have multiple personas, that there's privacy between those. People don't have to know that these two personas are the same physical person. And that everybody can build interactive experiences and be compensated for that work. So not just that you can create, but that your job can be creation in the metaverse. And that we're using AI, and we're using it for good. We're using it to safeguard children. We're using it to let people create and interact beyond their physical abilities, and to translate natural languages, to connect people who don't share a common natural language. So there's a big difference, of course, between providing that for our 50 people on the Windows box spinning up in the corner, and doing it for 1 million and doing it for 1 billion people, right? So as you start to scale up, there's a lot of nonlinearities you have to be super careful about. And that's where our challenges begin. So what do these look like today, and what are they going to look like going into the future? So for us, the heart of it is really user-generated content, right? We're 100% UGC on the platform. We want everybody to be able to create the content they want. Some people, that's artistic expression, some it's communication, some it's for profit. And that's great. User-generated content is the only way to scale. There's no way, so game companies, right, it's grown over time. Film companies, the number of artists, the number of lighters, designers, writers that you need to produce a AAA experience just keeps going up, and it's kind of unsustainable. And there's no way that we could build in any one company all of the metaverse content. There aren't enough artists in the world to produce what the demand is. And frankly, if we did build it, we'd probably build the wrong thing, right? And you see this happen with AAA products. Sometimes you get a failure, even though you tried to get it right. So it has to be distributed, the development of the content. And essentially, the community and the market should decide what's good content and what there should be more of, and people should do that organically. And we should provide the platform. So here's what the platform needs to do. Platform needs to provide discovery of all these different experiences. How do you find out where you're going? So search, recommendations, and quality ratings. You can decide which experiences you want to participate in, which content you want to purchase. There needs to be security. Security includes the concept of differential privacy. So if you lock down so that any experience can only get a certain amount of data about a player, you still have to worry about correlations and cross data between experiences. So if you have millions of experiences, you don't want them to be able to do exactly what happens on the web today, which is, oh, this knows your operating system, that knows how fast your mouse moves, your browser, and pretty soon we fingerprinted exactly who you are in real world. So we don't want that. So you have to be careful at a pretty deep level. There's a security aspect of blocking exploits, right? So you don't want people to be able to get in and cheat physics or cheat in sort of competitive experiences, and certainly not in the economic aspect. And then a key one, which hasn't been talked about a lot today, is ingest attacks. And this is something that's completely different from typical industry content creation. So usually your artist is not trying to take out the build system, right? They might do it, but they're not an adversary, right? You're all on the same team trying to make something. And we actually see plenty of attacks of people are crafting a broken MPEG frame or an FBX file that is designed to exploit some buffer overflow in an open source importer package so that they can actually use that as a hacking vector. So a lot of the content uploaded to our platform is trying to attack us, actually, either for harassment or to get access to backend systems. So fortunately, we have patches for that. We see this stuff coming and we stop it. But there's an arms race here that you don't normally have in content creation, if people are using your tools against you. And of course, our assets are programmable. They're interactive. They include code. And so that means you have things that are sneaky. They're like human immunosystem attacking viruses. They notice that they're running under the moderation system and they behave differently than they do in the wild, right? Or they actively attack the moderation and quality rating system. So that's a very different world from traditional content creation in the industry. I mentioned stability. So digital rights management, maybe through signing and encryption technologies, copyright enforcement, which is a little different than just signing. You want to prevent knockoffs, so things that aren't pretending to be authentic, but that are still infringing on the copyright of a creator either on your platform or off your platform. That has to be done through visual analysis using machine learning. There's no way you can get human eyes doing that. Versioning, so you need a dependency graph so that packages and things can build on each other and remix, but you don't want the kind of like Node.js problem where the string manipulation package, somebody hacks that and the entire system collapses. So you need to be careful at minimizing propagation and management of dependencies as well and versioning. And then the virtual economy. So you need to manage inflation, you need to manage price swings, you need a stable economy just like you do in the real world. And then moderation. So age and region vetting is essential. Content warnings, telling people like, you're authorized to see this, you're over 17, but are you sure you do want to see it? Letting people know what they're signing up for. We're a global company. Metaverse is a global concept. The laws of the EU, of China, of the US, of Canada, these are all different. And you have to operate correctly and within the cultural and legal standards of each of those countries. When we're in India versus Brazil, there's very different ideas about what's appropriate, what's obscene, what people are comfortable with. And you can have two parents who live right next to each other in the same neighborhood who have different rules for their kids. So it's important to have a platform that connects people around the world. It has to respect their differences as people, as well as recognizing their common humanity. And so this is tricky stuff to sort of manage the moderation process. And many of these problems, what's interesting is because of code, because this is a programmable system, the metaverse creates these problems in kind of a Turing-complete way because the content itself is Turing-complete. So in computer science, we know that it's impossible to prove that a program produces safe output. And safe in this case can mean, by your moderation or stability standards. It's safe can have other meanings in verification. And as an aside, if you like Neil's books, The Diamond Age has like the best layperson explanation I've ever seen of sort of, the church Turing thesis and these concepts. So as soon as there's code, you need to have both traditional tools like, an asset build and code verification, signing, but you also need some kind of AI-powered system that can actually get in there and start exploring the content. It has to be able to walk around and push the buttons and make sure that nothing unexpected and undeclared happens. And that's expensive. So doing that kind of hybrid analysis, massive amounts of basically bots playing your game and doing computer vision, doing auditory analysis. So scaling that is tricky, especially if you want to be free to participate in the metaverse, because somebody has to pay for that. So the ways that I've been thinking about managing that aspect of scaling of the analysis is basically through the virtual economy itself. So the simplest solution is that you just put a small fee attached to content creation. So if you want to submit something, you have to pay a virtual dollar or something like that. And it doesn't actually have to cover the costs of running the backend moderation and content system. It just has to be enough that spamming the system or trying to be a troll scales worse than the moderation system itself, right? And you're in luck if you're at scale and you're running the backend system because you can amortize a lot of the work, whereas the attackers don't have the same level of infrastructure, and so they can't amortize. And so if you scale better, you win economically, and you just disincentivize bad action. And this is the classic approach to security. You just need to make it slightly more expensive to attack you than to go do something else like, get a job at a gas station. So there's also several really interesting new computing technologies, and these are just emerging, for doing trusted computing on untrusted nodes. And some of these involve proofs, some of them involve signing, and some of them involve processors that have new secure instructions. And the idea is you could exploit those to say, when someone comes into the network as a content creator, we actually run the moderation for their content on their own computer because we have the trusted computing on an untrusted platform. And if you do that, you scale perfectly because everybody who comes to the network and imposes a cost, a moderation cost, they're also bringing resources to the network. And so this is kind of like SETI at home, right? It's distributed computation onto all the nodes. So that's also very attractive. That's a very emerging area in computer science, the sort of how do you do trusted on untrusted, but it's a very exciting area to think about for the future because it pushes the work back out to the content creators. You could also create a threshold, so you can have accountability without violating privacy. So I don't need to know who the creator is in the real world. They can preserve their privacy, they can preserve their bank account. If I make some investment they have to have in the metaverse platform before they're allowed to submit things that create work for us. So for example, maybe you need to have 100 hours on the platform with your account before you're allowed to submit a content you've created. And by doing that, you said, well, you can't make a burner account because you've got to spend 100 hours. Maybe you pay someone else to spend 100 hours, but either way, there's a cost to you. Or maybe it's you must have bought a certain number of virtual goods yourself before you're allowed to submit things. Because now there's accountability. Now you don't want to lose that account, and so there's a price if you're a bad actor and your account is moderated down or you lose it. And also at this scale, right, at the tens, hundreds, millions, billions scale, human crowdsourcing is a viable technology. I will point out the human crowdsourcing is not about having zero computation. In fact, it's a huge amount of mostly ML data science computation to gather that information to figure out what's actually right and sort of go from it. But you can have content rated by humans explicitly. They can file reports about things they don't like. And if you have enough people, you can limit the exposure of bad content pretty severely because you only need a small number of people to get a statistically significant measurement. You can also do better than, instead of explicit reporting and content analysis, and this is more the direction we're going in our own thinking and research, is you can do implicit analysis. So I can just expose people to content and see how they react. Right? Does it reduce the amount of time they spend on the platform? Do they turn away from it in 3D? Do they move towards it? Do they interact? And you can infer from those signals both the quality and sort of the value. So it's kind of an economics revealed preference, right? Like if you interacted with this thing a lot, in some sense, you were happy it was there because you wanted to play with it. And so that gives us a signal that like that's probably okay in some way. So let's talk about where these assets come from, though. So that's what we need to do when they come in to make the ecosystem sustainable. But it's very different than what you might be used to. We have a very different kind of creator. As I said, Roblox is not a game. It's a platform, and all the experiences are created by the players. And that includes the code. So it's not just you go in and make a 3D model. They write code in our Lua scripting language. So here's an example of some of the kinds of content for a mostly visual audience so that you can see what I'm talking about. And I'll jump ahead a little. I always crash at this point in the presentation. Don't be alarmed. This happened in rehearsal, so I'm just going to restart. It's how I know when to end the video. Okay. So, as I said earlier, there aren't enough professional programmers, 3D artists to meet the demand for metaverse content. I agree with what an earlier speaker, Rev, said, that AI has to be a big part of the solution. I'm going to get to that in a second. And it also has to be democratizing content creation. So making tools that anybody can use. From addressing those ideas of tools that are more accessible and everybody creates, we've seen a really different kind of content creator thrive on our platform than what I'm used to working with inside of the film and video game industry, as well as in sort of the mechanical engineering, industrial design industry. So they're much more diverse on every axis, including by age. And let me show you a few examples. So this is Joey Basil. She's 21 years old. She's been on the platform creating since she was 12. In a recent interview, she credited Roblox as providing an environment in which she could discover her own gender and be openly trans. She is the programmer for Adopt Me, which is an experience on Roblox. It averaged last year, 2021, over 500,000 average concurrent players throughout the year. So this is a self-taught programmer working from home, hasn't graduated from college. And last year, she was reaching more players than PUBG or Apex Legends, which are like two really big hot video games. So that's a very different world of content creation. And she paid nothing for her tools. She just created her game, put it online, and then it took off. This is Samuel Jordan. He's a digital fashion designer. He's 23 years old. He's been on Roblox creating since he was 11. Sam creates from a laptop on his couch. He doesn't have a monster artist desktop. He's not in Maya. He's using mostly open source tools. His income from Roblox last year was over $1 million in the US. That was exclusively for selling digital clothing and accessories. He bought himself the house that he's sitting on the couch of. Ann Shoemaker's 21. She made about $500,000 last year. Her games Mermaid Life and My Droplets, and she now employs 14 contractors of her own. So again, not even out of college yet, and these people are far more successful than I was many years into my career. And here's Garvey Mortley. She is 13. She creates obstacle courses and animations on Roblox. And she also makes videos about Black Lives Matter and was really engaged in how the Roblox community responded to that. Unlike the other examples, she's 13. She's not doing this for a living. It's how she expresses herself. It's how she interacts with her friends and how she shares her ideas with the community. So you can see from these examples that the creators on Roblox are really different from traditional VFX and game development. It's a different medium. They have different goals, they have different tools, they have different motivations, and economic models and expertise. And they learn their craft not from going to classes or reading as far as I can tell, they don't look at our documentation. They learn from watching videos online by other creators. So it really is sort of a self-sustaining community, but it's very different from the ones that I'm used to working with myself. And a typical experience on Roblox is 3 or 4 people working for 3 months, and then they release it, and then it's just continuous live updated. The last AAA game I worked on, I think we had 2,000 people by the end of sort of a 3-year development cycle. So 3 orders of magnitude faster creation, and yet for some of them a higher return for people who are doing it financially per user than the AAA industry. So this is the really different world, and we're really creating jobs, and if people are paying real money, selling things that people are getting real value from, even though it's virtual. And their tools are really different. And their demands for tools are really different. So they want tools that meet them where they're at. They're not willing to go out and learn something new and complicated in a so-called professional tool. They have their own world that they live in. So there's a lot we're doing to build the ecosystem there. The most exciting trend is machine learning. That's what we're super excited about. You've probably seen examples at GDC and SIGGRAPH of some of the work that we're doing. Animation is one of the hardest parts of the authoring system. So you will notice that anybody can paint a texture map. 3D modeling is a little more challenging, but our solid modeling makes it easy in some ways. Animation is hard. So professional animators just learning blend shapes, learning rigging, blend weights, deformers, quaternion curves. That's hard for people who are in the AAA industry. Getting people who are a 1-minute investment to be able to make animation is tricky. So here, these are 2 of our animation systems that are now coming out. So we have both facial capture in real time for puppeteering. So that's how you drive your avatar as you're talking. Your face is automatically moving, your hands are tracked. And then also our animation authoring, which then can be combined with IK, with physical simulation. It's just a webcam. So we have people in their dorm room with a cluttered background jumping on their bed, and that's how they make animation. So that's a pretty brave new world, and it's all powered by machine learning. I'm not going to talk about simulation much today because I've given a lot of research talks on that lately, and you can see those online. I think the key thing I want to bring out, and this is because it's the metaverse distinction, is that, so if you drive a Tesla, right, it looks like an internal combustion engine car. It has the same interface, right? There's a wheel, there's pedals, but it's completely different how it actually operates. The mechanism behind it is different, but it's familiar because it sort of has that abstraction, that interface. And Roblox is like that. It's not built like a game engine. The way that you build metaverse platforms is completely different, we're finding. And that was a migration for us. We started with a very traditional system. We do a lot of client-side computation. We think that's essential. We do client authoritative physical simulation, both for rendering and for dynamics and fluids and cloth. And the reason we do that is that most traditional game engines do things server authoritative for fairness, right, which is important for sort of esports and competitive games. The problem is that works if you have limited interaction, like you can shoot people or you're driving a car, because you can't interact with the world very much, so you don't notice the network latency except when you pick something up and there's suddenly a half-second delay before it disappears from the world and goes into your inventory. When you're in VR, or when you're interacting with, we have a fully simulated world, it's not just static meshes. When you're interacting with things, you'll notice that latency, and so we have to simulate in the client, and we actually hand off ownership. So it's kind of a Voronoi diagram through the world of whatever you're touching or close to, you take over simulation of, and then when you hand it to someone else, they take over the simulation. And for VR especially, this is essential. So we have essentially 0 latency because there's no network latency. And then the other key part of that is that we have a lot of users who are not fortunate enough to be in Vancouver and San Francisco, where you have great networks and you have 5G and you gigabit Ethernet. So we have people who are on networks where they have like 2 seconds of latency maybe on a 10-year-old phone. And we can give them a really good experience because the server network latency doesn't matter. That's only synchronizing things that are far in the distance that they can't touch. Anything they touch is simulated on their phone, and so it's local. And so this is another part of that kind of thinking of a global platform. It's not just for technology elites. It has to be for everybody. And so you have to design systems in a way that are robust to the infrastructure that you have in different places in the world. So that's where I want to wrap up with some conclusions. So there were sort of 4 lessons. The first was community first. Give players the freedom to experience things and control over what they're experiencing, and that provides safety. Respect the differences between them. Privacy and security built into everything in a business model. How do you get value to sustain your company? Make sure it's aligned with the interests of the community so that there isn't anybody turning on anyone. You want a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious one. Scaling up civility. If we go with moderation and quality rating first, that has to be built into everything from the ground up, just like you build in security and performance from the ground up. It sounds like a soft topic of civility, but it's actually very quantitative. It's something you can address with technology, and you have to match resources to costs. Scaling creation. Address a new kind of creator. Use new tools. ML was such a game changer for us. It empowered our natural language translation, empowered our moderation, and now it's powering all of our creation. And finally, this notion of simulation has to scale. So you have to find a way to pay for the computation somehow, and you have to hide latency. And embracing client-side compute, which is something that many of us in the industry are moving away from because of all the complexities. Turns out, for games, I think cloud streaming is a really good solution. For 1,000 players interacting densely with dynamic stuff, it turns out client-side computation for us is essential. I started with the community. I started with Snow Crash. I want to end there. It's the open metaverse course. It's not just our tech stack that has to be open. Right? It has to be our eyes are open, our minds are open, our hearts are open. We have to think very deeply, we have to be very thoughtful and be responsible at the impact of operating at this scale and get it right. We can't repeat the mistakes that previous technology generations have had. We have to innovate in ways that respect, that protect, and empower everybody who needs it in the community. We have to be visionary in our ethics as well as our technology. These have been my guiding principles in my time at Roblox and throughout the industry for connecting the world and making it better through shared experiences in 3D. So let's create the utopian future together. Thank you. Cool.
Wow, Morgan, that was really inspiring. We have time for a few questions. Who wants to ask the first question? There's a microphone right there in the hall. Okay, well, while folks make their way to the microphone, Morgan, I'd like to ask a question. Right?
Please, Patrick.
You mentioned that a lot of the experiences are built maybe by a team of 3, and they do their initial launch within 3 months or so, and then they keep updating it, which is a theme we saw this morning. That's really good compared to, I started doing game programming in DOS, right? How much farther do you think that will get?
So I think one of the things that's important about this notion of small teams iterating really quickly is it's the notion of a game is not a static thing, right? It's a thing that lives on. And our platform has encouraged, honestly, in some ways just because of its limitations, right? You can't do some of the things you can do in a traditional game engine. But also because of the flexibility. You push a button and it goes out to 1 million people. There's no cert process, there's no iOS upload, it's live as soon as you patch it. I think that has encouraged people to try out lots of ideas, the step above a game jam, right? Of you can have an idea, build it in a month or so, push it out there, and if it gets traction, if the community likes it, then you stick with it and iterate. And if not, you just leave it there and move on to the next one. And so I think it lowers the risk for people who are doing this professionally, as well as it just increases the flexibility for people who want to create and want to communicate but don't care about the economic aspect.
Very cool. We have a question here.
Yeah, you said that you, for sort of experience reasons, moved a lot of decision-making to the client. So I was wondering, how did you manage sort of the dark side of that coin where there's potential increase in malicious uses of moving decision-making to the client?
So the question is with client-side communication, or client-side computing, how do you secure the system?
Oh, pardon?
So it's how do you secure a system that's client authoritative?
Yeah, how do you ensure that,
Yeah, so this is a good question. So like I said, this is why most esports-focused engines and most competitive engines do server authoritative. They do prediction on the client. but the server decides everything. And that creates latency, but it also gives you a controlled environment. So there's a couple of things that are ways that we address that today. And what I want to talk about a little is sort of what we're thinking about for the future, though, because it sort of limits on what I can talk about the security part in public. So for the future, what we're looking at is there's this notion from, a terribly named notion from distributed computing called serverless lambdas, or serverless computing. It's terribly named because it runs on the server. The idea is code migration. So we have our own tech stack. It's our language called Parallel Luau. And we've open sourced this sort of high performance compiler and everything so that anybody who wants to can use the same stack for their platform. And having our own runtime interpreter and compiler stack means that we can migrate code. So we can have code that's running on the client, and then we can decide, or the experienced developer can decide, you know what, we think that client is trying to exploit and do something bad because they're untrusted. So we can migrate a piece of the code to the server. We can migrate it between server nodes in order to load balance, and even migrate from CPU to GPU, maybe for more power efficiency and density, like for computational fluid dynamics callbacks. And so that key idea is there's always a trade-off in systems between sort of freedom, performance, and safety or security. And if you have to make a static decision, it's going to be wrong in some cases, just like it's right in others. Having the ability to move the code around lets you dynamically analyze it and change where it's running to shift the trade-offs. So if I need more performance and burst, I can move it to a GPU. If I need more security, I can move it to the cloud. If I need less latency, I can push it down to the client. And so that notion of code floating around is really enabled by having your own computing infrastructure. I think that's absolutely essential that you don't have static affinity for a metaverse platform because of those trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, thank you. The talk was excellent, really enjoyed it. Early on, you talked about how building an open metaverse requires a civil approach to building it from the ground up. Is there any way that you can see where any companies have started to veer ahead of that or have started to go too far in the wrong direction?
Well, I don't like to talk about other people's companies, especially in negative ways, because you know, first of all, I'm a fan and of things that most people are doing, and second of all, I don't necessarily have all the information. So, I think for us it was really important, especially because we were starting with you know the most sensitive group, which is minors and minors globally. So very different child protection laws as well as standards. So it was essential that you know we didn't add like. As soon as we added chat, we had a way to moderate. It wasn't like we'll figure out moderation later, right? It was like before we turn this on, how do we make it safe? We're doing the same thing for the facial tracking and expressions, right? There are a lot of, depending on what culture you're in, there could be you know deeply offensive things that you could do with like you know finger tracking and face tracking. And so it's important to us that you know the reason that that's being shown in beta right now is that we want to make like 100% sure that we can, you know, avoid exposing children, avoid exposing marginalized groups to bad actors on the platform. So I think it's just the philosophy is the most important part is, you know, figure out the safety before you release, don't do it afterwards. And then from the business perspective, monetization is the same way. Like, you know, figure out how you're going to make money on it before you do it so that you don't ever have to take something back from the community because it's unsustainable. So those are kind of important lessons, and I'm really happy with the way we're approaching that now.
Thank you.
So we could do one more quick question.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, this was a very interesting and insightful talk, especially with tying in your personal experience with how the future is now versus how it was initially depicted in Snow Crash. My question is how different companies have different takes on the metaverse. And it seems that Roblox is geared towards sort of user-created content, but other companies may focus more on pure social interaction or industrial collaboration. Do you think that full integration between these different takes on the metaverse is necessary to fully realize the potential of the metaverse? And if so, how will that process begin?
So the question is sort of more authored social network versus user creation. So we actually, because of the context, I'm using the word metaverse today because we had the space to define it, and because I could start with, Neil coined that term, and so in this context, I think it's really clear what we're talking about. I usually don't use the word metaverse publicly. We just refer to social 3D and shared experience because there are a lot of different definitions, and I don't want to get caught up in someone else's one. I think there's space for a lot of different amazing communication methodologies. I think there's space for a lot of different platforms. I use multiple social media platforms today, and there's some things I don't like about them, but I use them because I get a lot of value, and there's a lot I do like. I play a lot of games. I play a lot of multiplayer games that have metaverse-like properties. So I think there's space and demand, and I personally value all of those things, whether it's a VR chat versus a Neil Stephenson metaverse that you can create your own content. What my vision personally is, what our company's vision is squarely in the center is everybody creates. We tried early on making our content, our own content. In fact, that was one of my first jobs 16 years ago, was after I made the rendering system. I was the first developer on Roblox, and I made some games and stuff. And we found that and maybe it's just I didn't know what I was doing, but we had the community has a much better idea of what they want than we do. And it's just, it's kind of the wisdom of crowds. It's kind of the free market. But it's really how things flourished. I think it was brilliant of Apple that they opened up their app store, and it wasn't just the only iOS things are made by Apple. Most of the apps I use are not by the vendor of the device nowadays. So I think that's important, and I like that kind of democratization of experience and content creation. But I also just, from a technology perspective, it's the only way to scale, I think. Otherwise you end up with, there's only 100 characters, right? There's only 5 experiences, and they're perfect and they're curated, but that to me isn't the metaverse. That's a great video game. And the metaverse to me is limitless possibility, is millions of things created by anybody. And so that's what we're squarely focused on. So yeah, to wrap that up, thank you also for acknowledging, I hope it came across clearly that I'm a tech enthusiast, I'm a metaverse enthusiast, I'm obviously a Roblox enthusiast, but my eyes are open, and I think yours should be as well, that there's a lot of problems in the world, and it's not just about providing amazing experiences, it's doing that, providing the escapism, providing the new value, but also genuinely figuring out how do we give people a voice who don't have a voice? How do we make a space where they aren't harassed in the street because it's a virtual street and an AI steps in and shuts down the harassment? So I think that part of the metaverse for healing the world is equally important, and that's a key part of the tech stack. So that's where I want to end. Thank you all very much.
Thank you once again.